I have a simple plate here of a wrench hanging by a wire. So let's say that the desired effect in this particular case was to make the wrench appear as if it was levitating in the scene. So I'm just going to pick a subset of this shot here, and we'll work on this. This is a good candidate for the open shape spline tool, so I'm going to drop down a Roto node, and we'll use the open spline to follow this wire. Well, heck, before we even do this, let's do a track. So now we have a track that is following the wire roughly at the bottom. And it's doing good enough. We're going to mostly be using paint techniques here, so this just needs to be good enough. So let's get started with our open spline. I'm going to click here, and in this case I really only need a couple of shapes, a couple of points, and hit enter to complete the shape. I only need a couple of points because the wire is so tight. And to adjust the overall thickness of the open spline, I'm going to middle click and drag in here to make it thinner, something like the wire. So I have my tracker, and it's generating some motion. There's more than one way to connect this actually to the spline. I could use the menu edit here, link to connect just that point, or I could connect both points by clicking link to tracker, translate as offset. So what this will do is it will link them with the offset already taken into consideration, and then drive the shapes, drive the points with that offset through the scene. So you see my track started to slip here, so that's not working great. Another strategy that I could use, I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that link, is I could take the overall shape and transform it along. And I think in this particular case, that's the strategy I'm going to use. So I could take the spline, its transform, and then I can link it to this track by selecting Match Move here. And on my initial keyframe, control dragging the translation, which will expression link it. Gonna no animation here. I'm gonna copy the center point of the transform into the transform tab of this. So now the whole overall transformation of this shape is being driven by the tracker. And what's nice about this is I now have the shape or point level animation available as another layer of transformation I can add on top. For example, at the end here where it starts to slip, I could create a keyframe of these 2 points and then use that to just touch that up a little bit. And the Open Shape tool also has ability to have round or square edges, and that's under the Shape tab. In this case, I think these round ends are going to hurt me more than they help, so I'm going to switch it to square ends so it kind of cuts off. So now that we've got the basics of that tracing out our wire, let's look at how we can use the clone controls of the Roto node to do some painting right in there. Now the first thing we'll need to do is make it so that the output is not just the alpha but is the RGBA, and then we have to switch the shape so that its source is not color. It doesn't become a paint stroke, but rather it becomes one of the inputs. In this case, we have it connected to the background input, so we're going to connect it to the background, and we're going to use the clone tool to create an offset. I want to leave this round to pixel checked on because that will cause this to not add any filtering of its own. So let's nudge over our clone a little bit to the right here. So I'm translating it ever so slightly to the right. Now you'll notice what's happening. I'm hitting Q to hide the overlay. Is it's picked up the background, it's reading from the background input and just cloning it back into that hole, and then doing an over back over it. Now all the same feather controls and everything else still apply to this shape. So if I wanted to, hitting Q to show the shape again, if I wanted to fatten up the shape a little, I could do that here. I think it was pretty good where it was. Or I could feather it using the controls here to feather the shape, and those are all working even through this clone. So now not only is this shape being used to create a matte, the Roto node is also being used to do the composite itself of the paint fix. Now this isn't great because you'll notice that the wire is still showing. So let's fix our clone a little bit here. We'll nudge it over a little bit more to the right until it goes away. There we go. Now I'm still seeing a little bit of a darkness because the area to the left of this is a little bit brighter than the area to the right. So let's go ahead and duplicate this Roto spline. Now remember that it's already, the transformation's already expression linked for us. If we duplicate this, it will duplicate all of those expression links with it as well. I'm going to disable this background one just so that we can see what we're doing while we work in this other one. And rather than cloning it to the right, or by scooting it to the right, I'm going to try scooting it to the left. So there you see, now it's picking up this slightly brighter background and compositing it in. Perhaps by taking the average of the two or by blending the two together, we can create maybe a more convincing result here. So I'm going to turn this back on. This one right now is covering it, but I have individual opacity controls for that layer. So it's picking up a pristine background because its input is also the background. So it's picking the clean incoming background before any composites. And now when I start to adjust the opacity of this layer, you'll see that I can fade it back out towards the other. So I'm using this to sort of create an averaging of the two. Maybe I feather it a little bit using the global feather control, because that's an option that's still open to me as well. And there you have it. It's a pretty convincing paint fix for the amount of effort that it took. Now I have a magic floating wrench. The only thing that needs work now is a little bit of touch up here, but there's the gist of a quick wire removal paint fix using the internal clone capability of the Roto node. So let's look a little bit more at the shape control just to explain some of this. There is a help pop-up tooltip that will tell you what each one of these modes actually mean. So color is just using a solid color. Foreground, the painted result at this point in the hierarchy. So that means if you choose foreground depending on what layer it is, it will pick up what's already behind it potentially and use that as its input. That can be useful also too if you want to propagate a clone or a paint stroke over and over and over again. Background, which just takes the normal background input, it's the default input, the original unaltered image, which is one of the more intuitive ways of doing clones. So I recommend starting with that. And then the background 1 and 2, you can put in additional background inputs here. So if you have for example, a clean plate that you have prepared on your own that you would like to use, you can feed it in to the Roto node here and then use it in one of your clone or fill shape type strategies. And the nice thing about using this type of workflow is you can keep it all in the Roto node and use the Roto node itself to manage the logic of your composite.